Greetings to you in the Redeemer. Have you ever wondered about the creation story in the book of Genesis? Whether it is a myth or a reality? Or did you ever wonder why God had to create the tree of knowledge when He did not want Adam and Eve to eat its fruit? Or do you have questions like, is it right to pray to Mary? Why should I go to confession? Or why should I pray for the dead? Or what is purgatory all about? Or are you, as Christian parents, struggling to understand your children? If the answer is yes, this video presentation is for you. Catholic Faith series aims to respond to some common questions that you may have regarding the Bible, certain aspects of our faith, and our Christian practices. St. Anselm in the 11th century defined theology as faith seeking understanding. Faith is a gift of God, and understanding is a fruit of faith. We continually strive to understand what we believe and thus come closer to God and His truth. We hope that Catholic Faith series may enrich your faith and help you understand and live what you believe. fr.Assisi, the creation story in the book of Genesis, did it actually unfold as it is given there? Or is it a myth?
In fact, there are two creation stories in the book of Genesis. Chapter 1 verse 1 until chapter 2 verse 4a and chapter 2 verse 4b onwards. Both these stories do not entirely tally. Does this make the stories of creation a myth? Yes, but not in a derogatory sort of way. Margaret Notting-Ralph gives a good definition of myth. A myth is an imaginative story which uses symbols to speak about reality, but a reality which is beyond a person's comprehension. Societies need myths. They compose myths, in other words, to orient themselves in a moral and a spiritual world. The creation of the world and humans is a reality beyond human comprehension. You must admire how the biblical writers use imaginative stories to make sense of this reality and communicate it to us in the best way they could.
But Father, you said there are two stories. Why two stories?
When something is beyond human comprehension, just one attempt to make sense of it may remain inadequate. The two attempts grasp the reality of creation in different ways. The first one in Genesis 1 is a transcendental approach. I mean a lofty approach. God creates for 6 days. The creation of man is shown as a climax. The seventh day God rests. This imaginative account most likely is completed during the Babylonian exile, where the chosen people were relatively secure and were doing well for themselves. They did not have the temple, but they focused on two institutions to express their Jewish identity: Sabbath and circumcision. 6 days they worked, and on the seventh they rested and commemorated the Sabbath. This liturgical practice, I believe, dictated their writing of the creation story.
I think I know what you're getting at. You mean they made God also work for 6 days and rest on the seventh?
Exactly. Their daily routine during the exile dictated the writing. In the exile, they know the meaning of work. Just as man enjoys stewardship over creation through his daily work, he ascribes transcendence to God's initiative over its creation. Here, the focus is on humans as stewards and God as one above, as transcendent. Just as God above created the world, man must look after it as stewards.
The second story in the book of Genesis chapter 2, 4b onwards, will then speak of God's immanence, God down to earth with humans?
You guessed. The second story actually is earlier, probably from the time of David or earlier still. You observe the attempt to describe the reality of creation is more down to earth. God molds the earth with his hands. Not as in the first account, let there be. But here, God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. The plants and animals are created afterward for man to behold and enjoy. He names them, in fact. God is convinced that in spite of the creation until now, which Adam has named, he beholds him still alone, and God is concerned. He creates Eve, and like the father of the bride, he brings her to Adam. And Adam exclaims, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man."
In fact, this understanding of creation reveals God's intimate involvement in the happiness of Adam and Eve. Don't you agree?
Yes, but there is a price. There is a call to obedience, not to eat of the tree of knowledge in the middle of the garden. I think we can reserve that for another discussion. So your question, do the stories or myths play out exactly as mentioned in Genesis? Obviously not. What comes home is the manner in which these traditions treat of the reality of creation. It is a reality beyond human comprehension, but put into words that become meaningful. One account reveals God's transcendence, his loftiness, and the other is immanence, his indwelling, his being one with us. One focuses on man's call to stewardship, and the other on his need for obedience. Both perspectives are important. The call to be responsible stewards of creation, and the call to be obedient to God.
What would happen if these perspectives are lost sight of?
In fact, we are losing sight of them already. Lack of stewardship, on the one hand, is destroying ecological balance in nature. And the lack of obedience, that is wanting to be like God, is just another way of saying we can do without him. We don't need God. This is precisely where humanity has fallen. Ecology is in crisis, and man has lost his sense of God. Perhaps we should end with a prayer. Father, you place this beautiful world in our hands, that we may care for one another and the rest of creation. You called us to obedience, that together with you we would enjoy true happiness. Help us to treat your creation right and enable us to realize we need you in our lives. Amen.